From analog.
Hi, Jim. You've a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
You're digital.
We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CQ Blind Hams Tech Zoom meeting and podcast, because this does become a podcast later on. This is brought to you by the folks that bring you the wonderful and informative podcast, CQ Blind Hams, which can be found by looking for it on your favorite podcast client, as well as your favorite smart speaker can be asked to play it. And of course, CQBlindHams.com, the website that everybody should at this point have bookmarked because it has lots of useful stuff, including information on this podcast and these meetings when they are being held live. If you don't get the notification via the Blind Hams mailing list, you can always go to CQ Blind Hams and find the info there on the day of the meeting so that you can all participate. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my other co-hosts here. Go ahead, Joel, W0CAS.
Thanks, Julian. N1CA. I don't know if you said that. I don't remember. But yeah, we also have a YouTube channel, CQ Blind Hams on YouTube. Back to you, Julian.
Yes, and you're correct. I didn't say my call sign yet. I was going to wait till the end, but what the heck, since we're here, I am Julian. My call sign is N1CA, November 1, Charlie Alpha. I live in the Southern California, Los Angeles area. And next we have Robert, NC5R.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back on the Tech Zoom once again, and I'm particularly looking forward to this one because we're so fortunate to have a very special guest with us tonight who has done some fabulous work on making radios accessible, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Julian. It's Robert, NC5R.
Oh, and you're welcome, and thanks for joining us here. And he was going to be the next one, Steve, WME2KTV.
All right, Steve in Manhattan. Happy to be here. You can find me on the Blind Hams Bridge, usually early in the morning and toward the end of the day. But give a shout out if you need something. Always happy to help.
All right, thank you, Steve. And just want to point this out in case anybody missed it, but I think we all know this is being recorded and will be made available later as a podcast under the CQ Blind Hams series. So if anybody objects to having their voice recorded and appearing in a podcast, then I guess the name of the game is to stay silent and listen. But we do hope that everybody who's here with us will say a little something at some point and participate, ask a question, and give us their great input. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the guest of our show here, Joseph Stephen VK7JS. For those who have been living under a rock and don't know, Joseph Stephen is the man who brings us the Accessible GD77 firmware that runs on the series of radios, the GD77, GD77S, Baofeng DM1801, and RD5R. And of course, the radios for the future, we got some of those up there on the list as well. But you know what, I'll go ahead and just kick it on over to Joseph, and he can tell us a little bit about what's going on with this project and see where we are and where we're going. So Joseph, without further ado, go ahead and take it away.
Good evening. It's morning over here in North Tasmania. It's about 10:08 a.m. here. Well, I'll just give a brief introduction of myself for those of you who don't know me, because I actually have a life outside of programming, although some people would wonder sometimes. But I'm Joseph Stephen. I've been married for 26 years. I have 10 children, or 9 living children. We live on a farm in North Tasmania, 205 acres, and I am a software engineer who works for Vispero or Freedom Scientific, EnterJoyce, whatever, going back to 1996, and I developed JAWS for Windows with a very good team. with Glenn Gordon at the helm. Some of you may know Glenn. And in fact, I was on a podcast with him earlier today, so you can look out for that one coming out soon too. But I took an interest in OpenGD77, as it was called, back early last year. In fact, I forked the project in around April. In fact, I was doing it even earlier than that. October the year before, I really got involved, but I really struggled to get cooperation with the main team. I wanted to make changes and they didn't want any contributors. And I guess they had the attitude, you know, we're making it accessible, you just get what you get and be thankful. And I really didn't like that attitude, because I think as blind people, we know what we want. And I'm not being ungrateful to them. They really gave us a great foundation from which to springboard. But as blind people, we don't want something half accessible or half baked. We really want to make things efficient to use, optimal to use. And so I got involved early, and once I couldn't get cooperation, I forked the project and changed the name to Accessible GD77. And well, the rest is history. We've made lots and lots of changes. I try every time they do release their source code to merge in what they've done. I haven't done the satellite stuff yet because I really would need 3 to 6 months of full-time work to do it, and I don't have that energy to do that at the moment. So what I'll probably do is leave Accessible GD77 as is. When he releases the MD9600 version of OpenGD77, then I will port some of the features that people want to that radio from Accessible GD77. I think that will be the plan. I only have so many hours in a day, and I think it's important to move forward not only with Accessible GD77, but also with OpenRTX, because of the growing unavailability of some of the radios, at least new ones. There'll be plenty on the used market for some time to come, I suspect. So that's why my focus has been turning to OpenRTX, partly because it opens up a lot of possibilities for radios that we don't have accessibility to, but also because the team are just so much easier to work with. I've already had 3 Skype conversations with the founder in the last week, and I'm making massive progress. He told me last night that if I didn't get involved, they wouldn't have accessibility probably for another year. But now that I'm involved, we'll probably have something up and running. At least I'll have my done bit within the month, and we may have a talking radio within you know, less than 6 months anyway. They've got a bit of work to do on their end still, but it's coming, and it's in the very, very foreseeable future. It's not way out in the distant future. And the radios that are likely to be supported with OpenRTX include the TYT MD380, 390, UV 380 and 390, the MD9600, the Alens HD1, and there will probably be others coming as well. The beauty of OpenRTX is that they've written it in a very modular fashion, which means they've written everything in a generic fashion. And then for each individual radio type, they have like wrappers or little interfacing modules which specifically translate the commands to the chipsets of those radios. So the beauty is I can write my part generically, and it will work on whatever radio they decide we can port it to. And that is just limited by who's got the time to reverse engineer new radios. So I think I'll open it up to questions, and unless there's something else the hosts particularly want to ask me about first.
Well, the biggest question, I got one, Julian. The biggest question that all of us have, do you sleep? We know you've got such a large life. I don't see how many hours. How many hours do you sleep a night, Joe?
I don't sleep a lot, actually. I probably have less than 5 hours sleep, and sometimes a lot less. But Things do catch up with me at times. I mean, I am human, and I get depressed, I get tired, I get sick of things. So, you know, I am a person, I'm not a robot. And I think one of the things that drives me, though, is the desire for accessibility and to help, you know, my fellow blind people to get what they can out of life.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, my question is very similar to Joel's in that it's like, where do you find the hours of the day? How have you managed to squeeze out that much productivity out of a 24-hour day?
It is important to talk about that, because this is why I don't want to seem rude with my emails, but I tend to write very short and curt emails, partly to save my wrists. I don't write essays when I write emails. I'm very man of few words, because I have to be with email. I have a lot of typing to do, but I tend to use my time very thoroughly. I don't have I don't have me time. I don't have I don't have time where I'm doing nothing. I never sit on a bed and just read a book. I am always doing something. So I'm either doing farm work, you know, fixing a fence or fixing pipes, or I'm hanging washing, or I'm doing dishes, or I'm eating, or I'm sleeping, or I'm programming, or I'm showering, or I'm preparing a Bible study for the Sunday church, or I am always active. There is no downtime. That's how I fit it in.
Wow. Well, somehow, some way, you're going to have to find a way to bottle that and put it into a supplement so that we can all upload, accessible energy into our workflows. I think that'd be great. So, okay, I know that there's a lot of people here that have questions. So I'm wondering if somebody's watching the raise hands thing and wants to call the first person there.
Is there any hands up, Angelo or Robert?
I'm not seeing any. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand.
Okay, I heard somebody, I think might have been Flip, might have a raised hand. Flip.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Joseph, in your CPS, I have one question. In the Dtmf editing field, I'm going to guess it's probably the same under your digital contacts when you're putting them into your code plug. Is there a way of adding where if you highlight one of them and you hit control down arrow or up arrow, they will move up by one or down by one to rearrange them?
I don't know, but Jan, OK1TE, is the blind guy in the Czech Republic who is doing most of the work on the CPS. I can pass that question along to him. I mean, I have done a couple of minor changes. Like the other day, Jessica, I don't know whether she's in the podcast, but she asked me, there's a button that's got greater than on it in the channel screen. What is that for? And I actually had to go and look in the source code, and it's a good place to publicize this. But the greater button in that screen copies the RX frequency to the TX frequency field, so you don't have to fill it in. But there's no label on it, so that's another thing I've got to get him to fix. So your question is, can you move Dtmf contacts up and down in the CPS? And I will have to ask him that question.
Okay, very well. Yeah, that in your digital and Dtmf context, that would be a wonderful thing to have. That way you don't have to erase and redo all of it if you're trying to rearrange the order. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Flip. Mark on your iPhone has a raised hand. Please unmute yourself and go ahead, Mark.
Okay, that might be Mark, M-A-R-G for Margaret.
I'm sorry, Margaret. It must be. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I have just a general question. What makes, say, your open RTX and your open software, your software that you can work on, what makes that available to you versus the ICOMs and the Yezus that you can't work on? Is the company just say, here's the software, we'll publish it so you can work on it to make it accessible? How does that happen?
Thank you. That is a really, really good question. No, if only that were true. So there have been a couple of very, very, very clever people, and I'll give it to Roger's team, although he wasn't the one that started it. There was a guy called Kai, DG4KLU, I think his name is, his call sign. And there's another guy, Travis Goodspeed. There's been a few people who, what they have done is they have literally reverse engineered the radio. So what they've done is they've looked at the binary, they've used a special tool, they've downloaded, they've dumped the EEPROM onto their computer, and they've looked at it, and they've figured out how it works. They've decompiled the code to figure out how it works. Then they have written a custom version of the firmware, and they make the source of that, initially at least, some of them did, open source, which means it's publicly available to get hold of. The source code and everything is. Now you get it as is, no guarantees or anything, nothing at all. Half written, whatever they've done, you get to grab that source code and then refine it, add features to it, fix bugs in it. So we are at the mercy of those very, very clever people who are able to reverse engineer and figure out how these radios work. No, you get no cooperation with the companies. I have suggested that the companies release their firmware under open source because it would be a win-win situation. I mean, amateur radio is for those who experiment, and of course, if they opened up their firmware to experimenters, they would sell more radio, so it would be a win-win situation. And of course, we could make sure that accessibility got added. So great question, thanks.
I have been in touch with the Anytone people, as many of you here probably already know, and of course, they're just a brick wall. So I turned to a friend of mine that I've known for, almost 50 years now, who is extremely high-tech. He's got a double E from Syracuse University, and him and a couple of friends of ours all told me exactly what Joe just said. In order to do this, you have to have a room full of signal analyzers, spectrum analyzers. You've got to get several of these radios and literally break them, take them apart, and figure out what the components are, why they're there, what they do, and you have to reverse get into the head of the guy who designed this. And these guys that do this, are, in my humble opinion, are just miracle workers of reverse programming.
And this is why it takes so long in a radio's lifetime before we get this. I mean, someone started doing it for the the Kenwood D74. I don't know how far they got, but obviously all of us have day jobs and all of us don't have unlimited time. But I dumped the ROM recently in the GD77 to figure out, for instance, if I could, extend the Dtmf contacts, whether we could have more in the database. And, it turns out I figured out we could. But I even wrote to a guy in Japan because I had a contact in Japan who talked to Kenwood directly. And, they all make promises, but or they all at least offer, yes, it sounds good. We'd love to make our radios more accessible, but they don't tend to do it because really there's no money in it for them.
Yeah, sort of a question, Joe. Now, the GD77 and all the radios that are accessible are DMR radios. Is it true that they use the vocoder from the DMR radios to make the voice prompts work? Is that how it's done?
Yes, it is. So what we do is we generate a word list, and we use an online MP3 service which will convert text to speech, and then we encode that the MP3s into 16-bit 8K wave samples, and then we send them to the radio and get the vocoder on the radio to convert that to DMR, and then we package all of those little fragments up into the VPR file, the voice prompt file. And then what we do is in the firmware, when we go to display a word, or if we want to speak a word, we will grab that sample and play it as if it was a DMR signal.
Amazing.
And that's why we don't have a lot of analog radios, only analog radios, because they need the DMR part to make the voice prompts.
Correct. So in OpenRTX, we will be using let me get this right, codec 2, M17 is the protocol. We'll be using the codec 2 vocoder to do the voice prompts rather than the DMR vocoder.
But the idea is the same. You take the wave file and you play
Yes.
it in, and you get the M17 data out.
Correct.
Joe, while you're talking about sort of the programming side of it, we had a person, Russ, write in with a question. He was wanting to know basically what programming language you use in the Accessible GD77 code base. He wanted to know if it'd be possible for him to look at the source code. He's interested in possibly doing some development. He's a programmer, and he also wanted to know finally if he could email you if he had questions.
Oh, absolutely. I've been asking for volunteers for the last 18 months. And there have been people who have volunteered to help me with documentation who it hasn't happened. But yes, indeed, it's out there. If you search on GitHub, on GitHub Accessible GD77, you'll find it. You can look at the source. It is in C majority. There's a little bit in Python, and there's a little bit in assembler, but the absolute majority of it is in C.
What's your favorite development environment?
Well, the thing is, the development environment is partially accessible. It's an absolutely very complex environment. I really don't like it, but I get by. It's an Eclipse-based development environment released by the maker of the CPU. It's called MCU Espresso, and it's designed to work on chips like the MK 22, which is the CPU inside that particular radio.
Cool.
Interesting. So I have a couple of questions. As we talk about expanding this project and bringing on more radios, is there a thought of at some point changing the name of it from Accessible GD77 to something a little more generic that could just be said, oh, this radio is compatible with Accessible, or whatever that name would be?
We can call it what you like if you come up with a good name. The problem is what people get used to. I mean, obviously OpenRTX is going to be called OpenRTX, and as long as they keep taking my changes, I'm not going to fork the project. If it gets to a point where they don't want to add any more accessibility and they don't want to have any new features, well, then I'll have to fork it. And at that point, we'll call it whatever people want to call it.
Just for the people who are listening to this podcast and have heard this word fork, let me briefly explain what that means. It means you, as a developer, maybe you got things that you want to add to a project, and you don't like either you don't like the way the other guy is doing it, or you've got a better idea. So you can go on to a source like GitHub, download all the other guys' work, make additions to it, and then you have two choices. You can either merge your additions and changes into his work, which is almost like a commit, I guess you'd call it, or you could take it home and put another name on it, and now it's your project, and that's a fork.
And this is because it's open source. You can't do this, obviously, without breaking copyright and all the rest if it's not open source. But it really depends on the licensing. And part of the problem with the Open GD77 was partway through the project, they changed the license. And they took it off GitHub, and really that's actually illegal to do, because if it's already been released under the Open GPL, you can't then go and close it without rewriting it completely, because it's already been released. But that's another argument and another conversation for another day.
Right. So the other question I had, which by the way, I just recently got a sighted friend of mine interested in this stuff. He bought a couple of our D5Rs and he's put your software in them and he's really enjoying it. So one of the questions he had is there any possibility of setting a toggle for the monitoring of the input or the reverse? Because right now that's done by pressing SK1, SK2. And then, of course, once you let it go, it goes back to the normal output monitoring. Would it be possible to add a toggle for that for people who like to monitor the reverse of a repeater without necessarily having to hold those two buttons, which can be a little awkward on some radios and a little tiring?
That's a great suggestion. Let me just write it down on my suggestions list here.
And then while you're doing that, I'm curious too, do you hear much from sighted users of your software, or is it mostly those of us that are blind or physically disabled? And I say physically disabled because of the wonderful work you've done with the GD77S, and I'm sure that's opened up a whole world for a lot of other people who couldn't have access to all this stuff on a radio. So I'm just curious, do you hear a lot from sighted people, or is it mostly the people with various disabilities, those communities?
I have tried not to step on Roger's toes, so I don't actively promote our firmware. It's only promoted through the blindness disability channels. I'm certainly happy for sighted people to use it, and I do know a few sighted people that do use it, but I've tended not to try and steal what he's doing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I said, he is enjoying it, and I recommend it a lot to people of all types, sighted or blind. So are there any other hands raised with questions?
No, but if there are other people who would like to ask a question, we're not that, it's not that crowded tonight. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute and let us know you have a question if you like, and we can take it.
Feature requests, bug reports, suggestions,
complaints. All right, nobody's. Oh, okay, take the raise hand first, and then I got one after that.
Jessica, go ahead and unmute yourself, and go ahead if you would, please.
Hi, I have two questions.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can anyone create their own voice prompts using their own voice?
Yes, you can, but only for new words that the radio doesn't already speak. So the radio has built into it voice prompts for about 320, I think, words as it is. But if you want to give a human voice prompt to a particular channel name or a contact name, you absolutely can do that. And it's called custom voice prompts. If you go to the docs folder of the archive and you look in the accessible guide for your particular radio and search for custom voice prompts, it'll tell you how to do it. You can even edit them on the radio. You can trim the start and end. You can associate a voice prompt with a piece of text in the UI, whether it's a contact name or a channel name or just one word. The other thing you can do, which people may not know, is when you are talking to people on DMR, you can grab a voice sample and associate it with the contact. So when you go through your contacts and you can't remember what someone sounds like, you can arrow through the contacts and hear the person as you arrow through and hear their call sign.
You also recorded a podcast for us demoing how to create your own voice prompts. It's on the CQ Bonham podcast. Yes.
I will warn you though, Jessica, if you're like me, it can get pretty addicting, and before you know it, you'll be staying up all night recording voice prompts.
And the good thing is, just to let you know, if you want to back up those voice prompts, you can do that. What you do is you go into the CPS, and in the extras menu, there's a, under the Open GD77 extras dialog, there's a backup flash. And if you back up flash, you hit that button and connect your radio, hit that button, it'll it'll read the flash and allow you to save it to disk, and so you can load it to another radio. Now, the only little gotcha there is that if you all radios with a 1 meg flash will work, but if you back it up from, say, the DM1801, which has the 2 meg flash, you can't put that on a GD77. But the GD77, 77S, RD5R all have 1 meg flash. Then the DM1801 has 2 meg flash. But certainly you can back it up if it's a 1 meg flash radio or a 2 meg flash radio. You just can't mix them.
Go with your second question, Jessica.
What are your plans? Sorry, what are your future plans for the CPS software?
I've really let Jan, OK1TE, the blind guy in the Czech Republic, sort of handle the CPS, because I'm not a real strong C# programmer. It takes me longer to do. I like to concentrate on what I'm really strong at. But I certainly can fix small bugs and things like that in the CPS, and I've done a little bit of work in there, but I've mainly left it to him to do. And he would certainly be, willing to come on a podcast, I suspect. I don't even know whether I think he gets the Blind Hams emails. It's just that he's fairly busy like me, except he has other hobbies rather than programming. So he's out camping and doing other things, but he's doing the CPS, and I know he wants to make it more accessible, but he's obviously has a lot less time to dedicate to it.
Anything else, Jessica?
I just wanted to say that myself and my friend Eric, call sign N8LUG, are huge fans of the software and your testimony. And this fall, I will be taking an intro to programming class in college. So depending on what they teach me, I may be able to assist with the project, and I would love that.
Well, all programmers would be gratefully be accepted and welcomed. There are other ways people can help. As I said, there's documentation. We need to convert all the TXT files to something more consumable. There's tutorials. There's lots of things that people can do to help in other ways too. I mean, the programming. I'll be very blunt with you. You probably won't be able to do much as a newbie, because it is very, very complex. But I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from having a look.
Yep. I mean, everybody's got to learn somewhere, and I think it's awesome that she wants to eventually get in and help. So let's see. I know Steve wanted to ask something, and then I think Flip has his hand raised as well. So go ahead, Steve.
Okay, I have a writing question from Chaos W6WH6. She's gonna kill me for that. WH6EYF, I think it is. I can never remember whether it's EYF or EYV. She's gonna kill me for that too. And she wants to know how to customize one of the FRS channels from the AutoZone so she can add PL to it. And
great question.
And then I have another question after that about the CPS as well.
Okay, so the first question, the easiest way to do that is to go to the AutoZone, go to that channel, copy that channel to VFO, and then copy the VFO to a new channel. I know it's a roundabout way of doing it. I've always wanted to add a feature to copy an AutoZone channel to a real channel, and eventually I might add it. But then once it's a real bona fide channel in your zone, you can put your PL tone on it and save it. It's just that in the AutoZone, because it's not a channel, it doesn't take up any memory, and therefore if you make the change in the channel detail screen, it won't be permanent. It'll hold while you're on that channel, and then as soon as you arrow away and back, it'll get cleared and it won't save it. So if you make the AutoZone channel a real channel by copy to VFO. You know, the orange button at the top of your radio, it's got a quick menu. Some people don't even know that exists, but your orange button, it's got a quick menu. You can copy channel to VFO, and then you go to the VFO, and then you use the orange button again and copy to new channel, copy VFO to new channel. Then you can go into channel details, change its name, and put it on your PL tone, and then your SK2 plus green to save it permanently, because just green by itself is a temporary save. I've wanted to change that too, but that's how it is in the official firmware. Then that AutoZone channel becomes a real channel, and you can in your zone, and it'll be treated like a normal channel.
Joe, just to make sure that we're completely answering Kayla's question, because we got a little different version of it today from somewhere in the email. She was also wanting to know, how do you check a PL tone on the family services family radio service? If it's in an AutoZone, is there a way to determine what the PL is?
Again, you would have to copy it to VFO and then do a tone scan. So on the orange button, you can do a tone scan in VFO mode. And when you receive that a signal from that channel, it'll tell you what the tone is, and then you can save it.
Okay, great. I think we covered it thoroughly now. You had another question, Steve?
Yeah, I had a question from Don, WH1WC. He pointed out something that I never knew, but apparently this has been the way it's always been, and we both sort of scratched our heads over it and can't figure out what's going on, and that is there is a field in the CPS for each channel for default contact. This is on the DMR side. What does it do? Because if you're on a DMR channel and you change to another one, and you go back to that channel, the default contact doesn't, the contact that shows up doesn't go back to the default. So what's its purpose, or maybe we're not using it right?
Yeah, I think I want to repurpose this. Roger, one of the last things he did before forking was he put a DMR ID override field in the channel, which is not not your talk group, but the DMR ID that will be transmitted when you're using that channel. So say you want a test channel and you want to transmit as somebody else, or say you've got two people using a radio, you've got VK7JS and you've got, W0CAS, and you've both got different DMR IDs. And what you can do is you can set up two different channels, one for Joel and one for me. And when you go to his channel and you transmit, you'll be transmitting as him. And if you go to my channel, you'll be transmitting as me. So it's not the talk group or the not calling someone. It's the ID that the radio sends when you're using that channel. Now, to me, that seems like, well, maybe you'd use it occasionally, but I think more often than not, you would use the other way, where you could set a channel to a default talk group. And then when you go to that channel, it would use that talk group. That makes more sense to me, but that's not how it is.
Yeah, that's what we thought it was supposed to be. So, okay, it's under development.
Well, at the moment, it's set up so that you can transmit using a different talk group. But again, remember, this is a little trap. When you change anything in channel details, to make it permanent, you have to do SK2 plus green, because green alone will exit the channel details and it won't save it. It's only temporary.
Right.
All right.
All right. We will work with it and see what we come up with. Thank you.
Flip, you've had your virtual hand up for so long, your virtual arm is probably tired. Please unmute yourself and go ahead if you will.
Yeah, my arm is about ready to fall off. I've got it in a sling now. But Joseph, I believe I copied or heard you correct that there are several hundred words set into the GD77 series. Is that correct? And if so, where can we get a list of all the words you got programmed in?
Well, I need to clarify that they're not all words. For instance, you've got all the letters of the alphabet. There's 26. You've got the alpha the phonetic spelling of the words, pronunciation of the words, there's another 26. So there's already 52. Then there's the numbers, and then there's all the symbols. So 52, 62, 80. So nearly maybe 90 of those words are just, letters and symbols and numbers. Then you've got all the menu items and all the values for those menu items. So in terms of actual words that are useful to use, like microhub, there's probably only about 10 or so.
Okay, that works for me. Thank you very much.
Anybody else have a question?
Looks like
John, go ahead and
W2QCY.
unmute. Yeah.
All right, there we go. The virtues of a braille display as opposed to swiping. Good evening. Very interesting. I'm going to take you back a little bit, though. It's sort of to your beginning, or at least a beginner's question. I have currently a GD77S, which I've had for about a year, so it does not have any of your upgrades. If I get the software, I have the link that was just broadcast to the Blind Hams list, thanks to you, to go get it. Is there anything I need to do in preparation for that, or can I just reload your software over the original?
You can reload the software over the original, but you will have to also update your voice prompts. And the reason why I say that is some people think you have to update your voice prompts every time you update your firmware. You don't. But in this case, when you go from a major release to a major release, you generally do, because I've added words that weren't in the old version. So in this case, if it's over a year, you'll definitely have to update both the firmware and the voice prompts.
Okay, I figured there was some update somewhere that was required. Thank you.
And also reinstall the CPS also, right, Joe?
Oh, yeah, thank you for reminding me. So because we now have a pause feature in the Dtmf contacts, and also the Dtmf contacts can support up to 60 contacts instead of 32, you should install the Accessible GD77 CPS software on your computer, and you can install that side by side with the version that's distributed by Ian, and they won't clobber each other, but you must use Accessible GD77 CPS to talk to Accessible GD77 firmware, and you must use his version to talk to this version of the firmware.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Julie.
I was going to say, I had a quick question. Earlier when you were talking about backing up your recorded voice prompts, I'm also wondering, is there a way, or could there be a way to back up the settings? Sometimes when you do a major update, it resets all the settings of the radio, which means your mic gain, your brightness, all the stuff that then you got to go in there and redo. Is there a way to back that up in your code plug or in some other way?
I think if you back up the flash, it will back up your settings. I would have to double check that, because I have to see where it's stored in memory, whether it's stored in... The thing is, there are two places where stuff is stored. One is in the EEPROM and one is in the flash. And the silly thing about it is that, for instance, the first 128 channels are stored in the EEPROM, and all the rest are stored in the flash. And that's how the original firmware was. So you can see how why we have such a mess on our hands when we have to reverse engineer stuff. So I'm pretty sure the settings are stored in flash, but I'm not 100% sure. You better not quote me on it. But you could try backing up the flash and seeing if it backs up your settings. The only problem with that is, of course, if you do a major upgrade and there are new settings added, then if you restore from the backup, those new settings may have weird values.
Okay. So more than likely it makes more sense just to go and do the work and do the settings. I pretty much got them all memorized.
Yeah, I mean, the newer version of the CPS does allow you to back up settings. Unfortunately, I mean, Roger's version, but unfortunately his settings are different to ours. So that's not going to help you.
All right, we did have one more question that was mailed in, and Mike asked, is there any possibility of ever working on making HF radios accessible?
I would love to. There is talk of the CQBH G90 having its firmware open sourced, or at least an experimental version of it. The problem with an HF rig, as you've probably guessed, is if there is no way of dealing with either a recorded voice sample or a digital voice sample, you can't have voice prompts on it. Now, some of them have a digital recorder, and like the Kenwoods, and potentially what you could possibly do is do some little tricks there and copy stuff from memory to the voice recorder or something and play it. But it's very hard to say. I mean, it would really depend on the hardware of the HF rig, and at this point, we don't have any on the horizon, unfortunately, except for that G90, and I really don't know whether that's possible for that one. Of course, what you could do is you could make it with compatible with a serial synthesizer or something.
Right, which is sort of the approach the HamPod has taken with hardware serial interface. All right, so wanting to be very mindful of your valuable time, Joe, I just want to ask one more time, does anyone have any questions for Joe that you haven't had a chance to ask? If you do, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question. Sounds like you've answered them all.
Okay. Again, I would like to reiterate, if there are people who want to volunteer to do things like cleaning up documentation, email me. And the other thing that's helpful is, a couple of people have donated radios to actually work on, which is really, 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 really helpful, because I don't want to have to go out and buy one every time I want to make firmware accessible. There are models that we don't have, like the HD one, that we need to work on. If people want to have one lying around or can get one and want to donate those, that's how you can practically help. And of course, the other one is keep your eyes out for, I do not have time scouring the web for things like, I mentioned the CQBH G90. If you see projects that are being talked about on various lists, tell me about them, because I don't go searching. I even with OpenRTX, they have a forum for discussing things. I'm not on there. You won't find me on there. I don't have time. So I've agreed with the developers that I will just work on what I need to work on. And if they want to pass on my comments to the forum, they can do that. But I don't have time. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on these forums. So keep your eyes out if you think there's something of interest, and let me know. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Go ahead and unmute, Jessica, if you had a question.
Okay. I'm getting inconsistent battery readings on my RD5R. When I do the command that I'm supposed to, it doesn't always say it. I've only ever gotten it to do it once.
The RD5R command is a long hold. So it's not a quick press like the GD77. That may confuse you. So on the GD77 and the DM1801, what is it, SK2 plus orange, and it's a quick press. Did I get that right? I can't even remember.
Yes.
I just do it automatically. But with the RD5R, it's a long press, which is probably why you think that it's not always doing it.
So hold SK2, and while you're holding it, hold down the VFO key, the top button by itself on the front, and keep holding them down until you hear the battery status. At least that's how I do it.
Yes, that's how I do it as well.
Yeah, that's what I do as well.
So if you keep both keys held down, you will hear the battery status within.
And the reason why it's like that is because if you probably figured it out, there are multiple functions on these keys. Now, I don't know where, I'm sure there is, and I'd have to go look in the documentation or the firmware because I don't remember everything, but SK2 plus MR by itself, what does it do? What does the short press of it do? I'd have to go check. But if there was nothing on that, I could always change it to make it the same, but I suspect there's a function on there already.
My other question was, can the RD5R and other radios in the GD77 speak while charging? If so, how?
Now, I've had a lot of requests for this.
I say that because I have some vision, but I can't see when it's lighting up and it doesn't make a noise. If it can't speak, it should at least make some sort of sound.
Well, if you leave it on the, yeah, I mean, if you leave it on the charger, I could make it when it reaches a certain voltage speak a message. I haven't done that. It is on the request list, and it's something I could possibly do. I don't know how useful it would be to have multiple announcements as it gets to 25 and 50 and 75 like someone suggested, but at least when it gets to 100 it would be nice, or to be able to query it while it's charging. The problem is I can't tell, at least I haven't found a way of being able to tell whether it's charging. I mean, I can look at the voltage and see if it's going up, and I guess I know it's charging, and rather than going down. But even that, it can be very variable with a battery. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in there which tries to get a battery average over a period of time. So it's not straightforward. But if I can figure out how to do it, I will add that eventually.
Yeah, FYI, I was the one who requested that.
Yes, yeah, no, but you're not the only one.
Yeah, I could imagine that would be a popular request.
Yeah, because I have a little bit of vision, but I can't see well enough to tell what color the light is. So some sort of noise when it's plugged in and unplugged. Yeah, so some sort of noise when you plug it in and unplug it, and periodic announcements at 25, 50, 75,
well,
and
see,
100.
I think it would have to be a toggle, because I absolutely hate my phone. When I put it on the charger, it makes all sorts of noise. When I go in late at night and my wife's already asleep and I put my phone on the charger, it inevitably makes all sorts of babble. And the same when I pick it off the charger, I don't need to know whether it's starting or stopping. But I mean, I can see that some people would like to hear that. So if I do add it, it will be a toggle anyway.
Yeah, make it a toggle. That's good.
Yeah, when all else fails, a toggle is always good because that pleases everybody. And speaking of toggles, one interesting thing, and I don't know if this is intended to be or if it's a bug, nevertheless, it's a useful one. I've noticed on my RD5R, if I do the shortcut keys, SK2 plus the 5, it turns the flashlight on the top of the radio, and that toggles it on or off.
Yeah, that's by design. It's actually in the original firmware, and Roger kept it like that, so I haven't changed it.
Oh, cool.
It's probably annoying for blind people though, because you could leave the light on and you wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it comes in handy, and my sighted friend who I got into these radios loves that feature too.
Now, I do have one other thing that someone asked about a while back, and that is the broadcast FM band on the RD5R. I was in contact with the developer who's working on that, and he's almost got it working. He's just figuring out how to enable the antenna, because at the moment, while the receiver's on, it's not receiving anything. So that was the last status report I got from that. He's the one who originally did the reverse engineering to get the RD5R working. So that is in process. I haven't done any work on my side, and I'm going to have to do a bit of work on my side once he gets it working, so that you can actually type in, a frequency in that band and, save channels and things like that. But I want to see if he gets it working before I dedicate any time to it.
Didn't you get some approval from Radioddity to be able to send out the original firmware?
Oh yes, yes, yes. And I even sent it to Roger. Even though that team is very unfriendly with me, I always share any news that I find with them. You know, I don't want to play their game, but I asked Radioddity whether I could distribute the 4.3.6 SGL file, and they said yes. So they know what we're doing, but they realize that we're helping them make sales, so they're not worried.
So along those lines, I'm just kind of wondering, at this point, if they don't have a problem with you distributing the file, why not just allow it to go back to the way it used to be, where it's just all one file and you don't have to go through the step? And the main reason I care about this is because I've noticed ever since they separated the SGL file from the BIN file, that it takes a lot longer to write to the radio.
That's where the lines would become blurred. I think they wouldn't approve of that because that is technically stealing their codec and putting it in ours. Whereas the way we're doing it now, we're not doing that. We're actually, there's a fine line, and you could argue either way, but I think technically right now we're not breaking any laws. Whereas if we pulled the firmware, the codec into our firmware, then we'd be crossing that line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's good that they allow you to distribute it. That certainly makes it a lot easier when you're sharing this with. When you're sharing this.
I'm sorry, G.
No, I'll just finish. Yeah, you know, it makes it easier when you're sharing this with new users, people who are new to this whole thing, to not have to make them go and look for something.
And I've updated the steps in the how to update the firmware document now, and it is a lot simpler now that you don't have to go and download their other thing and find it in the zip and copy it. It's already there. That already took about 4 or 5 steps out of the instructions. So for a newbie, that will make a big difference.
Awesome. Okay, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, we had a copy of it also on blindhams.com. So now I can go ahead and pull that down since it's going to be distributed in Joe's firmware. So if anybody goes looking for it, that's why it's not there.
I believe the latest beta I just put up there a couple of days ago has got it in there.
Yes. Flip, I'm not sure if you have another question. I wasn't clear if I forgot to lower your hand or if you had another question.
Oh, I had another question, Robert.
Yeah, please go ahead.
And I had emailed this one to Joseph once, and he said it was going to be in the list. And Jessica might want to listen on the GD77S for your battery status. It is a long hold orange up on top of your radio, and that one will give you your battery status. But it also gives you, I guess that is the radio temperature in Celsius. How hard is that to actually implement to where it's a toggle to go Fahrenheit or Celsius?
The only reason I haven't done it yet on the GD77 is because in the radio info screen, there is actually a visual temperature gauge, like a thermometer. And if I change it to report in Fahrenheit with the voice, it's going to be inconsistent with what's displayed. And so that's my only concern. But in terms of the 77S, I can certainly put a toggle and make it report in Fahrenheit. I think Roger originally wanted to do it in either because I saw in one of the very early versions, they had the word Fahrenheit in the voice prompt, but it got removed at some point. So I think he decided not to go ahead with it. So it's on the list again, but haven't gotten to it.
Oh, yeah. I was just wondering how hard that's going to actually be, if it's even, you had said, I think at one time it was added to the list. I just wasn't sure. So thank you.
You have time
Dave March, please go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
How do you raise your hand?
There's a button in the UI of Zoom where you can raise your hand.
Press Alt-Y on a PC. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, if you're on the phone, it's a little bit more complicated. It's in the More menu, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Oh, This is
No.
Hap Holly. Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Hap.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know how to raise my hand. I'm using a PC, by the way. Joe, you mentioned about the fact that you could use more radios to actually do your experimentation on, I guess it's a term. I have an RD5R I just bought about 2 weeks ago, and Chris Miller helped me do some programming with it, but it's by no means done. Would it be of help if I were to box that up and send it to you for you to work with, of whatever it is you're working with?
I do have an RD5R. So the only reason I would take that is if it was really unused, you weren't using it, and I'd keep it as a spare for people who may want one in the future. But the ones I'm really looking for right now is the Alens HD1, which I don't have, which I'll need if I need to test this. And I'm getting a UV380 from a KC5 ALH, but I think I will also need it like a 390 because it's slightly different hardware. So those two are the only ones right now that I'm looking out for.
Thank you for your efforts. Appreciate it very much.
And on behalf of the team here at CQ Blind Hams, I think one thing we love to do here is give away stuff, especially to new hams or people who need it. So Hap, I would say talk to Joel about that, because I'm sure he can certainly help you find that radio home if that's what you'd like to do with it.
I don't know if I want to entirely get rid of the thing. I'm just a little discouraged. It's it's a big bite to a big piece of the pie to bite off. So I'll get over it.
All righty. Well, just putting that out there.
I'd encourage you to be kind to yourself, Hap, and be patient with yourself and give it a chance, because it's the most
absolutely
radio out there.
You will. I mean,
holler when you're ready for TMI, Hap. We can keep going.
Thank you.
I mean, you don't have to use a DMR on it. You still use All-Star, and at least it'll talk to you and everything. Anyway, I'm actually coming very close to my limit of time today. So I think David had a question. If not, is there anyone else who's got a final question?
Go ahead, Dave. Unmute and talk to us.
Not sure if he's on a phone or if he's on a computer.
Command A if you're on. No, sorry. Alt A if you're on a PC. Shift Command A if you're on a Mac. Lower left-hand corner on the phone.
I think you're unmuted, Dave. Go ahead and speak to us.
Yeah, Giles is unmuted. Dave, you can talk.
I think all you can do is ask him to unmute.
All right, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to get you, Dave.
Okay, you lowered your hand.
I know how frustrating it is to use Zoom, especially when you're a newbie, so we'll be patient.
While Dave is working on it, Joe, you probably know this is Steve WB2KTV. I was the one that spearheaded the effort to get you the 9600, and for the rest of the people on the call and the podcast, if y'all want to start another one of those programs for the HD1, or if Joe could make a list of what he needs, I bet we can send him anything he wants.
Well, it's certainly very much appreciated because there's obviously enough of a cost in time. I don't know, I want to have to go buy the radios as well. So as I said, the Alens HD1 particularly is the one that has a lot of potential that we don't have. And the MD390 or UV390.
Is the HD1 a dual band, or is it just the UHF only? I know Enoch KS3X has one.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's dual band. I'm pretty sure it's got the same hardware as the GD77, or very similar.
You can have my MD380 if you want it.
I think Dave's is running an echo or something. Can you mute him, Angelo? We got an echo going now. There you go.
Well, if anyone's listening who isn't brave enough to speak up on the podcast, make sure you ask your question on the list and I will get to it in due course.
We got a 9600 question, Joe. Has there been any movement of Roger putting the source code out? Or are you just going to wait and use the RTX, open RTX with the 9600?
Well, I'm definitely going to be supporting with OpenRTX, and yes, I believe he will release it eventually, but it may be another several months at least.
Whichever one you can make accessible, that's the one we'll go with. If it's OpenRTX or Open 9600, if you ever get the source and make it accessible 9600, we're gonna enjoy it whichever way you go.
Well, thank you for having me today, and as I said, if there's any more questions, don't hesitate to ask off the podcast, on the list or off list.
Thank you, Joe, for joining us. It's been one of our favorite Tech Zooms to have you with us, and we've got some great questions answered, and I hope it helps a lot of people. And as we always end these things, guys, 73.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and visit www.blindhams.com.